You're listening to the Listen Up Show podcast, show 035. Today we're talking with Internet of Things startup founder of Brinc, McLaughlin, who actually helps startups start up their own Internet of Things. Listen up, trusted friends. It's your business, it's your family, it's your life. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, Mitchell Chadro here. Welcome to the Listen Up Show podcast. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for stopping by. The Listen Up Show podcast is produced several times per week for your entertainment, and show notes are found at mitchellchadro.com/show 035. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Please sign up to my email list for the latest special offers exclusively for our Listen Up Show Startup Entrepreneur podcast audience at mitchellchadro.com/sign up. Our three sponsors today: HostGator sponsors our startup round, Audible, an Amazon company, sponsors our fast pitch, and Snappa sponsors our wrap-up. You could also follow me on Twitter at Mitchell Chadro and Facebook.com/listenupshow. All links are in the show notes. Now, let's get into the show. What are we going to actually talk about today? Well, we're going to talk technology, we're going to talk startups, Internet of Things, and entrepreneurship. McLaughlin, how are you this evening?
Well, it's first thing in the morning my time, 7:30 in Hong Kong, but I'm doing great.
Wow. So wait a minute. You're actually calling us right now from Hong Kong?
That's right.
Wow, that's really, really cool because, right now it's this evening here in Philadelphia. So, we really appreciate you being outside the U.S. and doing a lot of traveling, coming on the show. We're really excited. We're looking forward to jumping right in here, covering quite a bit. So what's the one best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Wow. So many. I'm huge on mentorship, so I like to take advice from a lot of people and get a lot of people's different opinions. But I would say that one big thing from moving from originally the East Coast of the United States, I grew up in Virginia, then I studied abroad a couple times in Germany, then I lived in Australia, the West Coast of San Francisco for almost 10 years, and now Asia for 3 years, was one of my mentors in my master's program told me that, it's not just something fun for you to do, to question what you know and where you grew up and all the things and beliefs that you're given growing up as a kid, but it's actually almost a responsibility. And that, me traveling around and uprooting myself has actually, given a lot of opportunity to my family, my friends, because now you've seen one person do it before. You only need one person, only one example to know that something's possible. And, I definitely have upset a lot of people in my family and, definitely know that a lot of friendships have gotten strained from all the kind of moving around that I've done. But I do know that, that having a couple of those people behind you saying, there's actually a really kind of positive tailwind that you might not even understand. But now my nephews, my nieces, my next door neighbors, people that have, seen me online have now had that opportunity to say, if he did it, maybe I can do it too. And I never really thought about it from that angle before. So it gives me a little extra motivation to keep going.
It's really amazing, and we're gonna get into this in a little bit as we continue to ask you some questions here. But I mean, you're quite a world traveler, and you've been able to see a whole lot of different things, and I'm sure that sort of gives you a competitive edge in business. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, your experiences in terms of traveling and seeing, different countries and working with different people all over the world, really?
Yeah, I would agree with that 1,000%. And you don't really know that until you've done it. I definitely understand how scary it might be, not just the unknown, but just culturally. Right now in Hong Kong, although I live in very much a Western neighborhood, the reality is every single day I'm a foreigner. And that's a crazy mind shift that has to happen. And, I see it happen with my friends and my family as they visit out here. But on a daily basis, people that look like me that speak English, we're less than 1 in 10 in Hong Kong. Especially in mainland China, we're less than 1 in probably, a million or more. But it's really important that people understand that the thing that everyone, heard about macroeconomics and the headlines in the news, whether you're a high schooler or whether you're in your 50s, this idea of globalization is not a joke. this is super real, and it's happening at a pace now that the internet is just like a conduit. It's happening so incredibly fast behind the scenes, and people really don't understand it. I know a lot of my family and friends that are sitting in Virginia or sitting in the West Coast, and they actually don't see the influence of China that's in their backyard right now. They probably, frankly speaking, before they end their lives, they'll probably live in a building or have a boss or work for a company that's wholly Chinese owned. And if you don't understand that, then really you're not going to be competitive in the long term. And that's something that I think, I'm in my 30s, and I look at people behind me in their 20s and kids that are going into high school, and I really think that if they don't find a way to break out and get exposure to the Eastern way of doing things, specifically China, that you're really not going to be competitive. It's almost like, everyone says that, Microsoft Word and all the kind of basic computer skills to the basic level of literacy, and now coding is now going to be the expectation. I think that understanding how to do business in different cultures, specifically Eastern cultures, and even more specifically Chinese, is going to be the new baseline expectation in the next 20 to 30 years. So for me, I think it's the nail on the head. My wife and I think that in our 30s, doing this gives us massive competitive advantage, but that by the time we're in our late 40s, 50s, that this will be just completely normal and expected.
So the world really is flat, and that kind of takes me into, you actually help people with this Internet of Things. Founders go from, you're actually helping founders go from concept to launch, in this world where, eventually everything is connected. So when someone actually asks you, Bay, so what do you do? Like, what do you tell them?
Well, it really depends, where they're starting. I think the biggest thing, that one of the kind of biggest pedestals I get on is, having been in the Valley for almost 10 years, there's this unfortunate, I don't know where all the listeners are from, but there's this real, I don't really like it, but there's a sort of force that is telling people that you need to be a founder, that being in a startup is cool. And sure, there are aspects that are fun, and being your own boss is great, and, maybe not sitting at a desk job and working for a massive conglomerate and, doing 9 to 5, maybe that's, a better life for you. But the reality is that working in a small business, whether you're building a burrito shop or whether you're building, a film company or whatever it is just hard. And I think that this is one of the biggest pieces of advice I give our founders is, don't just jump on this bandwagon because it sounds cool. Hardware on top of, all the other types of companies you could build has got to be one of the most challenging things you could ever do in your entire life. And, a lot of the biggest, successes and failures are my friends, and it's brutal. And you have to be hardwired for this stuff. So, it's okay to want to get into the startup world, but I always tell these founders, you better be ready and be strapped in for this, because no matter what you do, this is a 2 to 3 year journey minimum, and it's going to be really, really challenging. So that's kind of the first personal check I do, because the biggest problem is not usually the product or the technology risk or the market risk. It's always the founder risk, because being a founder in this particular type of company, hardware IoT, is you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone, which is the new economy, the Western way of doing things, and smashing yourself into the old economy and the Eastern way of doing things. And on top of all the normal challenges, now you have cultural challenges, physical challenges, like how long it takes to get boats across the world, and all these different shipping to 30, 40, 50, 60 countries, and import-export taxes, physics, how your materials bend and shape and break over different types of travel and temperatures. So I really help check their commitment first. And that's any kind of business. But for ours, I'd say it's a factor more challenging than others.
Being in the finance world, we measure all different types of risk, and I heard you mention a real unique one, and that's called founder risk. It isn't for the faint at heart, and like you said, it takes, it's grueling, and when you start up, especially in this particular space, there's a lot of challenges to certainly go through. Before we get into our next question, the startup round is actually sponsored by HostGator. Now, have you ever heard of HostGator, Bay?
Yeah, when I was back in the States, I heard about them a lot, but you definitely don't hear about them out here in Asia.
Yeah, no, certainly. Well, for all of our startups out there, and for people who are just looking to sort of build a presence online and get started, everything that you need to start up your website, from web hosting to domain name registration, you could actually go right to HostGator. And so if you guys, for the Listen Up show, the Startup Entrepreneur podcast, if you head on over to mitchellchadro.com/HostGator, you can actually start your plan today. Bay, two of your startups actually failed. We talked a little bit about some things that could be successful, but you've also had some challenges and some failures. Can you tell us some of the lessons that you actually learned from those failures and the takeaways for others out there, either just starting up or thinking about getting started as they continue to sort of pivot until they actually get it right?
Sure. I'll hit on two mainly. For the first one, it's all around customer development and listening to your customers. And the second one is about, kind of starting out a company a little bit too early. So the first one was I joined a startup right after my master's program. I got lucky. I was actually working for Apple in college, and then I moved to the West Coast one way, drove my truck over there with my best friend, and found a couch, found the startup, kind of the California, San Francisco dream. And I was working for a startup that was based in Berkeley, California, and headquartered out of Scotland. And it was really challenging because, I had worked at Apple and we were doing higher educational sales, and I was also doing higher ed sales for this company. And I was traveling the West Coast 20 days a month, just on the road constantly. And I just got so frustrated because I couldn't find a way to break through to the founders and explain to them that the product that they thought was going to move and do really well, that was doing okay in Europe, in the States, it just wasn't sticking. And so, I was the face of the customer. So doing those customer development interviews and just realizing that this thing sucks and this product is just not going to work and we have to change it. But, I was 23 or whatever, so they weren't really trying to listen to me. And it was really, really frustrating because at the end of the day, the market doesn't care about you. You have to listen to your customers. And if you aren't willing to change the product or features or positioning or whatever, then what's the point of even having the company? You're not just going to shove whatever you feel like down the market's throat and expect it to take it. Like, it doesn't work like that. And I knew that at 23, but I was working with guys who were much, much older than me, and that was super irritating. Unfortunately, 12 months later, they sent in a banker to liquidate the whole company. Founders, presidents, everyone was fired, including myself. So that was a good lesson learned on someone else's dollar, which I always tell people, if you're interested in the startup game, it's not a bad place to start, to jump into a startup with someone else's cash to learn before you start your own, which is a good.
So how did you then begin to start to implement some of these lessons that you learned from that first failure? How did you then take what you learned there and start to really, I guess you weren't really going to pivot until you're really into your next startup, but how did you start to then implement those things from the lessons that you learned there in that failure?
Well, it worked out pretty nicely, actually. The next startup I joined is actually two brothers. They had a technology that they had used or they'd written to actually run their business, but they thought it might have been its own company. I got lucky enough. I was introduced to them through a friend who I surfed with in San Francisco. And so we started that, and that was really nice because I took those lessons of, hey, listen to your customer, iterate your features, work with them to build the product. So we did that, and we actually sold that company. So that was a win. But the next lesson learned was for me personally. At that point, I was, 25 or something. And at that point, I thought, well, I'm in San Francisco. All the pressure tells me, all the media tells me that I'm already behind the game. I'm 25. And I'm late. I need to be starting a company. So I took my passion for outdoor and extreme sports, and I started building a location-based platform to support any athlete for those outdoor activities. And I was just pumping in all my money and all my time, getting my friends to work nights and weekends, paying developers, the whole thing. And it was a super tough lesson to learn, but at the end of the day, at 25, I still didn't know anything. And I just felt like I was supposed to. I always, say like the word should is the worst word ever. I felt like I was supposed to start this company versus I actually knew it was the right time. So that was a huge lesson that I learned, and another bit of advice I try to give everyone is you've got a long time. In your 20s, you're just trying to figure out the basics. You don't need to start a company just to start a company. And if you're going to start a company and you aren't willing to bet everything on it, you probably shouldn't be founding that business. And I think places like San Francisco, unfortunately, have sort of a negative distortion field when it comes to this. And it applies a lot of pressure to people to start companies when they probably just shouldn't. They should probably just be an early stage employee at a startup company. But that was a tough lesson learned. But I actually got a little bit lucky. I made an investment about 2 years ago here at Brinc, where I was able to bring some of my technology out from that business and put it back into this new investment about 8 years later. So it wasn't too bad, but definitely a big loss for me too.
Well, we're gonna definitely get into Brinc. I have obviously several questions about that because obviously that's your new company that's been in existence now for a little bit more than 2 years. But what is the one thing that has contributed most, would you say, to your success?
Probably discipline. I'm very, very regimented. I grew up in a military family, and all the men in my family were in the military, and all the women in my family were teachers. So I really, really have a pretty harsh discipline with myself. And I think the extra hours, the extra discipline and work that you put in on a daily basis adds up. So, I'm 33. I'm not super old, but I think I log more time and learning and execution than most people do. Probably every day. I mean, I'm putting in 14-hour, 16-hour days every day. So, and also I love it. Like it doesn't feel like work. So I think I started this when I was my first kind of quote unquote company, as I created a lawn mowing and pine cone picking up in company with me and my friends when I was 12. And I think it's just that mentality of just hustle and grind all the time because the only thing you can't get back in your life is time. You can fail and get secondary companies. You can even get divorced and you can get another spouse, but you can't get any minute back in your day or your life. So you just got to be as good as you can at using the actual time that you have.
It almost seems like you're in the moment at each step of the way as you're sort of going along. You're really kind of leveraging it, like you said, you're disciplined as it relates to your time. Time management is your strength then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think, you just said something that I thought was really important is I don't know when this was. It was definitely in my probably mid-20s. I think for a long time, a lot of people look at, what the media is telling you, what your friends and family tell you, what books tell you, professors, whatever. And I think I learned at some point, I think it's my mid-20s, that, everyone has an opinion, and it's just that. It's only their opinion until you decide to internalize it and do something about it, and then that's when it becomes advice. But other than that, you're just out listening to opinions. And I learned around, in my, I think it's like 25, 26, that I have a really good gut instinct on most things from my life. And when I second guess that instinct, I generally get burned. And so I just stopped second guessing myself. Now, that obviously doesn't work every time. I do a lot of research and apply a lot of logic and theories to what I do too, but overall, if something feels bad, 99% of the time in my life, it's the wrong thing. So I've just learned to trust my instincts too.
So it's really listening to that, for lack of a better word, that inner voice that people have, that intuition that they have about what's going on internally with themselves and trusting in themselves as well, correct?
Yeah, or it might be a business associate. It might be a business deal. It might be advice from a family member. It might be about, should you propose? Should you not propose? Should you take this job? Like all those things give you really, really loud signals from an emotional level, like your body and your mind and your soul. Like you're hearing all this stuff, but you're probably trying to justify it using, checklists, like saying, well, here are the pros and here are the cons. This is 15% more. This is 15% less. Yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, you got to feel that it's the right thing first.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of our audience are, not only are they new startups, but some of them are actually in entrepreneurial type of studies within the college setting. And, they're trying to decide whether to continue on with their startup or to start up something new or to pivot or to do a co-op, for example, or get more experience before transitioning back to a startup. And it sounds as if what you're saying is they really need to be in tuned with that inner voice, that's calling them to go that certain way. I mean, am I correct?
Yeah, it's really hard to checklist your life away. You really do need to listen to more of knowing yourself and kind of intuition that you get.
I really, I think we phrased a new word here. You can't really checklist your life away, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I like that. I want to jump in here, of course, with Brinc. I mean, that's your new baby, the one that you're kind of working on right now. And I just want to make sure that I actually understand fully what Brinc is. And so it appears that it's hardware. It's like a hardware investment fund. You've got a platform there. You're trying to bring the next wave of connected technologies to basically people's shelves all around the world, because from what I read on your website, you're literally in all these various countries. So can you tell us specifically some of your 2016 accomplishments, which I think will be helpful in explaining to the audience just specifically what you guys are doing?
Sure. So I definitely appreciate the complexity of this. This is a new space. IoT and connecting the physical world is a very new trend. And overall, it's still incredibly nascent. But I think the most important thing to understand about what we're trying to do is based on our vision. And the reality that we see is that every physical object in the world in our lifetime will become connected. And I don't mean, all the light bulbs and all the cars. I mean the dirt. And I mean the cement, and I mean the wood in your floors, and the pipes under the ground, and everything. And that sounds scary and dystopian to some people, which is fair, but I think it's happening as an inevitability. And I think that if you look at the positive, that once we have everything connected, we'll finally be able to understand the data that's around our lives. So it could be our environments, our bodies, anything. And we'll be able to make informed decisions for the first time ever, because the reality is, one of our major verticals that we focus on, which I'll transition to, is health technology. When we think about our bodies and, how we interact with the world, our doctors are really just trying to be magicians on a daily basis. They're actually guessing when it comes to our health. I mean, think about when you go see a doctor and all the different things. You get about 15 minutes. You see the doctor. They, poke you a little bit, put a thermometer in your mouth, take your blood pressure, and then try to miraculously diagnose you of, how you're feeling. And that's all you get is 15 minutes. That's insane. But the future, where you have all this data about yourself over time, they understand what you're eating, they understand the health and the air environment that you live in on a daily basis. Like out here, the air is very different than where I'm sure you are outside of Philly. The food, the water content, lead in the pipes that you're drinking, all the different things, they actually have a chance for the first time. And for us, that's a really positive future. So for this year, we actually did. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, isn't the challenge, however, knowing whether or not you're sort of too early to sort of move in a particular area or a particular space, as fascinating as it's going to be? So, for example, someone listening right now might have an idea in this particular space, in this particular area, and how do they know whether or not they're too early to the market, where, sometimes being the leader is good, but sometimes maybe not so. So I guess, how does the average person out there know whether it's right or not, besides just listening to their own intuition?
I'd say, you hit one of the three parts of how we look at risk. So founder risk we talked about earlier. Now you're talking about market risk. And market risk is you hit the nail on the head. It's hard and physical because it's not like software. You can't ship a product in 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. You're talking about a 2-year cycle, almost minimum, even for the best teams, to ship a product to the market and get it to retail. So that takes a long time. And so you're making a bet today that you're not going to know anything about whether it's going well or not for about 2 years. And people, probably have heard about crowdfunding and everything else. And the reality is getting fundraising, like, one of our teams, Soundbrenner, just announced $1.5 million. And then we have teams like Tildrill that raised $3 million and Kiddo raised $2 million. So our teams are raising, capital, which is not a problem. But they're also doing well in crowdfunding. And neither one of those things is proof. That is not success. That is just a small step in the long process. But when you have other people around you, like other investors, you talk to distributors and retailers, and then finally you look at the technology that's available right now, you can start triangulating and get a sense of, wow, this is way too early. This technology, this way of thinking, these new behaviors, this just isn't going to make any sense in the next 2 years. Now, you can't predict this perfectly, and I think every one of us is guessing to some extent, but you can at least put a bit of a framework around it. Now, as a founder, you might not have access to all that information, but you can at least start talking to investors that know what they're talking about. You can at least start looking at the competitors, like Apple. They do lots of patent filings all the time. You can find them online. You can look at what Google's doing, watch CES. You can go to trade shows. So you can get a sense of where the market currently is and try to extrapolate, okay, in 2 years, do I think this is reasonable? Or maybe I'm too late, which also happens. It's like a fitness tracker. If you show up and apply to Brinc with a wearable on the wrist for general fitness, like, you must be kidding, right? But I still see people that do that. So I think it's
certainly
too early. It's also too late.
You know, you mentioned crowdfunding. We actually had an entire show on specifically crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, and I know that the company, just from looking at your website, obviously finances some of these, and I know that you offer accelerator programs where the companies are actually giving up equity, but you also charge per project in terms of cost. So can you talk to us a little bit more about the type of crowdfunding that you're doing, like what you're doing to help the companies, and the cost versus them giving up equity in the company in terms of how you're getting paid?
Yeah, let me clarify a little bit. So we started out as only an accelerator. So that was the standard. We give you cash and services and support for equity. That was the normal model that everyone has. We then started realizing, not because we're super smart, but because we literally had teams showing up with millions of dollars of crowdfunding money or investors' money coming to our doors in Hong Kong and Shenzhen in China, and they were leaving bankrupt. And I'm not joking about this. People think it's like, Lilly Robotics is a great example, having raised $34 million in pre-order campaign and just blowing up and going bankrupt last week. I know them, and I know the investors that gave them more money. And the fact that a company that raised $34 million in pre-orders couldn't deliver a product tells you that, guess what? Money's not the real problem. So when we looked at this, we had teams coming to our offices. We really liked these founders, but they didn't know what they were doing, and they were going to China with a big bag of money, and they were coming back completely bankrupt. And finally, we started saying, well, we're the dumb ones. If we have teams walking in our door, but they're too late for our accelerator, but we know that what they're about to do, they're going to do wrong, and we can help, we should probably do something about that. So we started building out our studio. And our studio is just a services company like anyone would expect. And right now we have 7 teams. Some are multi-million-dollar crowdfunding campaigns that you've probably heard of. But they're really just needing help with the physical product development, manufacturing, sourcing, essentially China. And we always ask teams, like, we appreciate that you want to learn, but as a founder, you have limited time and limited resources. So how you spend that is really, really critical, and actually says a lot about your ability to lead the business. So if you're the one that's sitting there with your sleeves rolled up, working on a prototype in a factory in China, you got to really ask yourself, am I doing what's right? Now, you can't just outsource everything, and you need to understand some of it. But we really think that the best way to do that is for you to learn alongside experts, but let the experts do their job, because frankly, you're not the right person to be doing that. China's always going to be better. So we have a studio that supports on everything China related, from validating your bill of materials and your concepts to helping you engage your contract manufacturers and making sure that you get your products on time, on price, to specification. Our last part of the business is our growth and distribution team, which takes those teams that can manufacture, like our portfolio. We've got 4 products shipping right now, and we help them scale in the physical world. Because scaling post-crowdfunding, post-manufacturing into retail is a whole new challenge, because it's not an online store. You're shipping tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of products around the world, and then once they get to retail, you have to make sure they sell through. So there's a whole set of challenges, and we look at 3 distinct life cycle stages, and we'll continue to evolve, frankly, because new problems will emerge, and all we want to do is support this really exciting future that we see, which the only way to do that is to help these founders exist.
It's amazing. I heard you actually say, after telling us the example of the business that just went bankrupt last week after raising $34 million, and the quote that I heard from you say was, money wasn't the problem. And, for the average person hearing that in the audience, the average startup, the average student entrepreneur, because there's a lot of universities here within the Philadelphia and the tri-state area, they're probably thinking and saying to themselves, gee, I need to raise this money. Money is the problem. Money is the issue. And what I'm hearing very loud and clear from you is, at least in the hardware space, with a 2-year life cycle to market, that isn't the case. Can you just address that very, very quickly here, just because
Sure.
That really kind of jumped right out at me when you said that.
Yeah, of course you need money, but I think that people really get infatuated about fundraising, and I always tell people, like, look, if you're starting a company to get your name on TechCrunch, then guess what? There's a lot of other ways to do that. And you don't just have to raise a $2 million, $3 million, $5 million seed round to do that. So you have to really understand that you need money to run the company. However, if you're trying to start a business, like, this is my favorite thing for hardware. So in software, it's a little different. Everything's really well documented. There's lots of great programs. There's lots of great mentors. Hardware is still wholly undocumented for the most part, and you're actually going back in time in terms of learning how to do business in the offline old world economy. So I always ask founders, is anyone on your team, or has anyone on your team ever launched and mass manufactured and distributed a physical product? And 99% of the time, the answer is no. So
how do you actually help them sort of integrate that with software? Because nowadays we've had so many different entrepreneurs come on with apps, and there are various downloadable software, and and that's the sexy thing. And yet there's a lot of opportunity in this particular space. One of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on, because it's just so fascinating. And not everybody, you don't see the big rush that everybody's moving into with software. So how do you help the clients, the customers, the startups sort of integrate both together?
So we put an expert at every single step of the process. Our company is very, very senior in terms of the people we've hired. So every person sits over a particular stage of the life cycle. So our head of software would support the integration. Our head of hardware supports the communication between the East, the West, and China and the West, and make sure that the whole process is overseen. Our head of distribution makes sure that we're thinking about the right price points when you're actually working on the concept phase way before you launch. Our head of validation is making sure that you're actually building an audience, your price points are correct, your actual launch strategy is going to make sure that you hit your numbers and you don't mess up when it comes to distribution and price points and all the trade networks you have to build. So we look at an integrated end-to-end process, and software and hardware obviously have to come together. What's nice is that software is still really well documented. And even though it's not perfect when it comes to the hardware world, we generally find that most of our founders come in with a fairly good baseline understanding of the software world. So we're not going back and doing the kind of 101. But if we need to, we're happy to.
I read your bio, and there's a lot of stuff there to unpack. And we talk about not only business, but balancing that with family and life. So as I was reading through, I thought to myself, how does Bay actually balance running a business like Brinc when you're actually then maintaining equity positions in 20 different companies across 9 different countries, ranging from B2B to SaaS platforms to the #1 surfing website? Like, there's only so many hours in the day. I know that time management is really good for you, but how are you doing this?
It's certainly not perfect, but I think that you look at yourself first, and actually I'm running a series on my Medium blog right now, which is just beta bay on Medium, is life hacks for entrepreneurs, because I have to constantly reevaluate this. And I usually break my life down into quarters, just like my business is, because most people get into their life and it's a run-on sentence, which sucks, but it's the reality. You just kind of graduate college, and then after that, there's no more milestones or kind of benchmarks. It's just life forever. And, maybe you get married, have a kid, and that's kind of it. But really, you have to find a way to break down that really long duration into smaller, manageable chunks so it doesn't become overwhelming. And you also don't, I always tell people that, not making a decision is also making a decision. That's, people generally just aren't in tune and conscious about developing their life, themselves, the world around them, and just kind of life happens to them.
How have you become so self-aware? I like the concept that you talk about. You say, break your life down into quarters. Here I'm a fella that has a tax background. I have a master's of law in taxation, so I'm a finance guy, and so I'm always talking about fiscal and calendar years and things like that. But you're actually suggesting to do that with your own life and be very introspective as to what's going on, to the point where you're kind of looking at it like from that perspective.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be releasing a framework that I created about 5 or 6 years ago this year. I'm polishing it up right now, but it's really basic. you have to lead yourself first before you can lead anyone else. I'm very serious about that. If you aren't consciously controlling and dictating and developing your own life, then you don't deserve to lead other people, period. And if you're not going to be serious about that, then again, like, you shouldn't be taking on that extra responsibility of being a founder. So for me, being a founder of founders, I build businesses. It's really critical that I take that super seriously, and I've just created these little breakdown frameworks. Like, think about this. Everyone wakes up in the new year and says, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. Like, look, like, that's not true, right? Like, you're not going to just randomly lose 20 pounds. But what you can do is you can commit to, 3 months, a small quarter, of doing something like, I will absolutely do some physical activity 5 days a week. So you can start there, and that might mean you lose 2 pounds. It might mean you lose 40 pounds. But what you can control is you waking up in the morning and doing what you say you're going to do. Controlling the outcome in any capacity is really stressful and generally impossible. So all you can do is control what you can do on a daily basis, which is, within where your kind of feet go in a day is sort of where you find and add value. Is whatever I do is clearly what I'm assigning value to. And if I do what I commit to, I have a chance of an outcome I want, but I certainly can't control that outcome. So I think it's a little bit of letting go of the control feeling, and at the same time creating a framework where you can actually feel successful versus getting on your own case all the time, feeling like, oh, I could be doing better, I should be doing more. It's a really challenging thing to balance, but I think you've got to work really hard at it, because unfortunately, if you don't, the world kind of piles up on you.
We've really covered a whole lot just in that last 3 or 4 minutes. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom, actually, and all the show notes are going to be back at mitchellchatro.com/show035, because what you're saying is very deep. Now, when you come out with this, you're saying it's life hackers that you're putting together. I mean, because I'd like to be able to obviously have a link to that as well, and maybe at the end of the show you'll let us know, because I think that people in the audience would certainly be interested in that. And so anyway,
but I say it's easy. If everyone follows me on Medium, it's just medium.com /@BetaBay, BETABAY. It's usually a weekly series I'm putting out right now. It'll probably be about 5 to 6 parts. It's just walking through the day-to-day basics, from your health routine to my financial focus to my communications framework, like all the things that I've learned and things that I know help me, but that I need to reassess them every quarter, because I get off track too. But I can't let it get off track for 2 years and find out that my health is completely in the gutter. I need to actually reassess, regularly, to make sure that I'm consciously deciding where I want to go and what's going to get the priority this quarter and what's not.
When people in the audience are looking to work with a company like yours, like Brinc, they like to see, that's why I asked you about your accomplishments in 2016, and as I was reading, the one company, Glassy Pro, which is really one of the number one surfing, websites out there in terms of technology startups. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with them and a little bit about how they came to their success?
Sure. So I think there's a little bit of a mix-up in the notes here, but I'll walk you through it. So the number one website I'm referencing is the Inertia, which actually has had their 7-year anniversary. I was talking to the founder 2 days ago. So Zach, the founder of that company, he's now created the number one platform for surfing, snow, and outdoor lifestyle on the internet. But going back to the company that I created myself when I was about 25, that I ended up, folding and then repurposing the technology, we met Miko, the founder of Glassy Pro, in Spain at the Mobile World Congress 2 years ago. And he was he already had created a platform with 150,000 users, and they were actively communicating and supporting each other and finding the best surf around the world, and was the number one top-ranked, app in the App Store and the whole thing. And so I told him about my background in the company I created and said, hey, if you want to build something like a physical device, I think you could really take over this market in a much deeper way and stop competing in the App Store, which is super challenging and really easy to fall back to the back of the pack and no one will ever hear about you again. So, he joined our program, and we're actually in the final stages of the R&D of the final prototype before we pull the trigger on mass manufacturing on that, because that's the way for a lot of the listeners that are doing digital to think about is there a way to interact on a more intimate basis with your users in the physical world? Because in the digital world, as I always tell people, hardware founders, have it super challenging, but the risk reward is really different. So if you win really big. If you lose, you fail miraculously, super publicly. Whereas in software, if you fail, you sit in the back of the App Store in the 10,000th rank, or someone downloads you, which is a great start, but they don't use you, and you're on the third homepage and the 14th folder on the third page of that folder, and no one ever uses your app. So you just have to understand the difference. Like in the physical world, you've got a chance once that person sees you and buys that product, it's in their physical life now. And there's an opportunity to create a much deeper emotional connection and interaction and loyalty with that user than software.
Yeah, I could see where the rewards are big, but the challenges are so different, and the way that you handle risk and approach it and how comfortable you are with it is quite different. You had mentioned about your involvement earlier in your career with Apple, and I know that people are obviously very interested in how you became a founding team member of Apple for their global SMB channel. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and I'm sure you have some pretty interesting stories there.
Sure. So I was fortunate enough. I started working with Apple when I was in college. I really just hounded them. This is some advice for anyone that's in college. Just because someone doesn't have a job doesn't mean you can't make them make you a job. So at Apple, there was no space for me in college. However, I was just convinced that my college, I went to the College of William & Mary in Virginia for my undergrad and my master's. And funny you said tax. I also have my master's in accounting. But I couldn't understand why a university was going to sign a contract and require their users to have Lenovo or IBM laptops when we were paying to go to their school, and they weren't going to support me as a Mac user, and I just lost my mind. I couldn't believe it. So I just started causing a huge stir on campus, and I went and talked to the CIO. I talked to the dean of the law school, the dean of the business school, and I was just super frustrated. And so I kept hounding Apple because I heard they had this thing called college or college reps, and there was this program that you could actually work for Apple while you're in college, which obviously that sounded like a dream job at that point. So I just hounded them, and they kept saying, look, we don't have a place, we don't have a place. So I kind of gave them an ultimatum, and I said, look, either you're going to give me a name card or a business card, or I'm doing this anyways. And so they told me, look, okay, we can't pay you, but we'll put you on put you in the system, but we don't have headcount. So we'll give you a card, but we can't get you all the gear and pay you. And I was like, I don't care. Just give me the business card. I'm doing the work anyways. And so I went around and I was signing up. It's actually iTunes University, and this whole thing now that podcasting was fairly new. We were the second kind of wave that got signed up. But what I did is I just put enough pressure on the system, got a bunch of different parts of the university to sign separate contracts to the point at which the whole university had to fold and finally sign up. And that was kind of when Apple was like, cool, this kid isn't making stuff up. Put me on the payroll at that point and then let me run with it for the next couple of years, expanded my territory, actually joined the global advisory board for the working with the SVP, John Couch, of education with 5 of their college students myself. So I got to get some exposure. But unfortunately, there wasn't an easy way to transition from the college program into the corporate program. So that's another thing for students. Like, don't get down on your luck if your path doesn't just smoothly find its way like perfectly to your dream job when you're 22. Like, again, remember, you don't know anything when you're 22. No offense, but like, you just need to work and get through it. And so instead of complaining and moping that Apple, like I was the top, right? I was in the top 5 in the whole world in this program. And I couldn't find a way into the corporation, which seemed insane. It's probably stupid on their behalf to not make that easier. But either way, I said, I don't care. So I got in my car after my master's, and I drove cross country to San Francisco, and I slept on the couch. I just showed up. I was like, well, I'm going to be here anyways. And then, 4 years later, funny enough, I ended up going back, and that's where the kind of next chapter went, where I helped them build the small to medium business channel, which is obviously a much longer story. We can do it if you want. But I got lucky enough to have the kind of dream moment, which goes back to the intuition, recognizing patterns I talked about earlier, is when you're looking at your career, you've got to be patient, but you also have to wait and watch for the pattern. And when you see it, you have to take the shot. So, I was probably, 26 or whatever it was, 27, and I was getting interviewed by people at Apple that made no sense. Like, their titles were way too senior. Their histories were way too senior to be talking to me. And so I finally just called them out on it, and I realized that I had stumbled into something much bigger than I anticipated or what I thought I was interviewing for. I ended up, having interviewed for a brand new division that was unlisted. No one was talking about it. I didn't have a title for the first 6 months. Like, it was very special.
And so would you say that was like serendipity? Would you say that was luck? Would you say, I mean, obviously you had to be at the right place at the right time, but we've talked to other entrepreneurs before, and I know that you have to obviously make your own luck, but things really needed to sort of line up for you to actually be in that meeting. Is this what you're talking about, the entrepreneurship?
Evangelism, yeah. So
yeah, the channel. Is that the same one with Guy Kawasaki with The Art of the Start? I mean, is that the same type of area that he was in, or is this something totally different?
No, this is different. So this was an opportunity, and to go to your kind of concept of serendipity, I completely agree with that. Like, I really, 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 really believe that if you want to look for what's bad in the world, like, you will have a pile of crap on your table all day long, right? Like, life will not work out. If you can find the positivity and continue to do the grind, you have a chance to, I always say, like, being in motion is the most important part. Like, you're stirring up opportunity. Like, I'm a surfer, so I always think about when a storm comes over the ocean, the water gets really murky because all the sand and all the sediment from the ground is now being mixed up and thrown up back into the water. And I always think about that is the more I'm in motion, the faster I'm moving, the more I'm doing, the more I'm getting out there, the more opportunities are going to come across my plate. And had that Apple opportunity not happened, I wouldn't have just been like, oh, well, that's it. I would have just kept going. But once I saw that opportunity, I could see it, and I realized it's like, man, I've just never been interviewed by people for this title. What's going on? Wait, I can't reference this. No one knows about this. And so I finally just asked them, and I realized, oh, wow, this is actually pretty special. And I didn't know what it was going to become. I mean, there was 5 or 6 of us, and then it ended up becoming 2,000 people in a $1 billion business. Like, I mean, it was pretty successful. But I would not have known that. I couldn't have known that. But I just knew that I was getting a shot that was way above my age or ability. Everyone around me was super senior, and that this was a chance just to kill myself and see what came of it. And yeah, it ended up doing all right for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I read in your bio that that you talked about some of these world-class founders and venture capitalists and incubators and accelerators that you actually were working with and helping over at Apple. I mean, are these some names that we've heard of? I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because people are interested in not only that, but what you kind of did and what you learned through that whole experience as well. Sure.
So the first 2 partners that kind of helped me figure this out, I had a theory when we were building the small to medium business channel that there was a lot of repetition. It's actually kind of the foundation of everything I do now. Was I kept seeing founders being in San Francisco that were making the same mistakes. And these are not founders you haven't heard of. I mean, these are, Jack Dorsey of Square. This is Yammer, Dropbox, Airbnb, Twitter. But they were all my customers. So I didn't see it like a little bit. I saw all of it. And what were some of the common threads,
some of the things that all of these very well-accomplished people in their own right, but yet you could kind of see the common threads of the same types of things repeating over and over again, almost like you said, patterns that you could see in your own life, but patterns in their lives that they were doing that wasn't quite right?
Well, so I don't know about from the personal lives, because obviously I was quite young when I was seeing this, and a lot of them, are just so good at what they've done and what they've become now as entrepreneurs. But I was looking at it from the operations side, which is my passion, both from the people side of operations as well as the system side of operations. So I was looking at the system side at first, and then how it was affecting the actual employees, the growth patterns, the financing, and I was looking at this thinking, man, I know all their investors, and I know all these startup companies, and I don't know why they're not talking and sharing notes, because Airbnb is making the same mistake as Dropbox right now. And I could see it, because I was sitting on the backside of it at Apple, and they're all coming to us. And so I started going to the investors. So I started out with First Round Capital and True Ventures. True Ventures was one of the first investors that led the Series A, and Fitbit. I just said, guys, I'm seeing all of your customers. all of your investments are coming to me anyways. I would love to just sit down and figure out how can Apple play a role and better support you and the startups that build on our platforms, make apps, and use our technologies. So I started rolling with them, and all those customers. I mean, literally, I don't think you could name probably an investor or a startup in the Valley that wasn't my customer or one of our partners. So all of them, 500 startups, Kleiner Perkins, Mavron, Freestyle. You name it, they were our partners.
And what were some of these common errors or mistakes operationally, since that was your passion, that you saw that you were able to then convey to some of the other people that it was going to be helpful to you pointing that stuff out to them?
So going back to pattern recognition, it was very specific to this particular vertical. So when you're talking about VC-backed businesses, a lot of people don't understand, especially the startups. Like when you decide to pick going to your mom and dad and asking for a loan, going on crowdfunding and promising your pre-orders, or going to a venture capitalist, which remember, they're taking money from someone else. It's not their money. They went to essentially a bank, took money, and they're loaning that money to you, and they need to hit a return. So, never get that confused, because most founders don't understand the economics of venture capital and they end up getting into trouble. But if you think about the pattern recognition, startups that are building with VC dollars are attempting to build a 100-year company in under 10 years. That's the thesis. So what you're doing is you're breaking all conventional wisdom of what it means to build a really durable and sustainable business over 100 years. I mean, most companies don't last 25 years, more or less 100. But when you see that, you see these businesses that are, let's say just Square for something, for example. So I was in Square's office when they were hand soldering their first, card readers, and they were down in 3rd and Mission, in the San Francisco Chronicle building, and there was the two co-founders literally hand soldering, like Jack Dorsey and his co-founder, like the devices themselves, right? He's the founder of Twitter, and he's sitting there, and they're working on hand making their own little devices. And I was laughing, thinking, this company is going to explode. First off, it's Jack, but secondarily, I just saw a huge opportunity that they saw. I was like, man, this is going to be a huge market. And what does that mean for the business? And you go from having 4 people, 6 people, and then in year 2 you have 50, 60. In year 3 you have 300. In year 4 you have 1,000. And
right.
That is not normal. And that puts strains on every dimension of the business, not just the operations and the physical parts. Like, all these startups end up flipping offices every year, but they're signing 2-year leases, and they have to break it and pay a huge penalty, all the way to, I remember Airbnb was calling us because their internet in Japan was broken. It's so silly. But this is stuff that you just see happening over and over again. And I'm like, okay, look, you guys need to learn from each other, because these types of behind-the-scenes operational lessons are not sexy, and you're too scared to go tell your VC that you don't know how to. And so we need to create a system that helps you scale like a 100-year business over 10 years that doesn't break the system or break your business, because you're spending money everywhere, you're hemorrhaging employees. This is not smart. And so that was kind of my thesis, and that thesis, funny enough, has proven to be far more effective in the hardware world than the software world. So I'm taking that same mentality to building Brinc.
Interesting, yeah. So you were able to obviously use the leap from Apple to the Internet of Things with hardware in terms of where you're at now. That's how you were able to sort of make the transition, because I'm thinking, okay, how did you get from Apple to where you are today? But it seems as if you've used those life lessons that you learned there to what you're doing now. I mean, would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I learned my personal passion for physical devices with Apple. I mean, I don't know any PC that I ever fell in love with. But I remember my first Mac very clearly. And I remember most of my Macs and most of my iPhones and my iPads and my Apple Watch and all the things. I fell in love with these objects, but I didn't have a background in the physical world. So I knew that in order to learn that, I had to leave San Francisco, because if this trend was going to be true, and my operations ability and my ability to develop leaders and founders and build great culture in businesses, if that's going to actually apply to the physical world, I can't sit in San Francisco and read about it. I need to go to China. And so my wife and I, had this great opportunity. Her firm was able to transfer her, and she had been out to Asia. I'd never seen it, frankly. I'd never actually been here. But she said, I've always wanted to move out there. Would you want to do this? And I was, within 24 hours, we were packing. So we were on the road and leaving San Francisco in the tailwind, because I knew that this wind of change in the physical world was coming. And you're not going to learn that sitting in Philly or New York or Chicago or LA or San Francisco. You need to be here. So been here almost 3 years in March, and I would say with all humility, if anyone thinks that they understand how this world works after 3 years, they're incredibly egotistical. I mean, I feel like I am just like crawling as a baby. I mean, we know a lot more than a lot of people, but one of my co-founders, his family's been in China for 40 years doing manufacturing and distribution, right? So I know a lot more than I know about, but I'm still learning for sure when it comes to this.
It's amazing. Before I was going to jump in here to our fast pitch, which is our next round, I was going to say it just seems as if you have to have that certain personality that you're willing to sort of up and leave with, in this case, with your wife, to go all the way across the world to a different part of the region of the world, whether it be Hong Kong or China. And but from that, you've learned quite a bit, and you continue to learn and realize that you really don't know as much as you think you know, because there's all these different cultures, and the globe is so huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's not right or wrong. I mean, it's just a different strategy. But I know that there are certain things that you cannot learn by reading. You cannot learn how to do a business deal and negotiation in China by reading the book that tells you about China. It's not how it's going to work. You can't learn about the cultures and how you do business in the Middle East by sitting in Texas. It's not going to work. Like, you have to actually go immerse yourself in these cultures. And that's, again, up to you if you think that's important or not. But what I do know, with going back to one of our earlier topics, is that as the world gets smaller, as we become more global, this will be something that makes you not competitive if you don't do it. If you sit in your town and you don't travel and you don't go stretch yourself and get uncomfortable, it's okay. Like, maybe in 30 years, like, you'll be able to stay in, your suburb and just do that job, and that's okay, like, maybe. But I know that people in my family are in their 50s, and they're getting their lives disrupted already because they aren't competitive anymore. That's scary. And if you're in your 20s or your 30s and you still haven't traveled or you haven't gotten out of that comfort zone, and you think you're going to just be able to sort of like duck and cover as the globe comes closer to you, and you're just going to be able to, be fine for the next 30 years. The problem is we're living longer too. You're going to be working when you're 75 or 80 now. You're not going to retire at 55 or 65. Like, you need to at least know what's going on. So worst case scenario, get a flight. West Coast flights to China right now are like $500. I mean, just go be there and see how it feels, and get uncomfortable a little bit and question what you know.
There's so many value bombs in what you just said right there, and I know that everybody in the audience is going to be listening up to it. Plus, the show notes will be back at my blog. So in this round, the fast pitch, these are like really quick questions with some fast answers. It just kind of gives some additional insight in you as a person. It's sponsored by Audible, which of course is an Amazon company. People can head on over to mitchellchadro.com/audible. I mean, I love books. I mean, I'm sure you love books too, right? Although, you got to not only read it, but you got to obviously do it. They have 180,000 titles. You can sign up for a free trial. You get one free download. So, people head on over to mitchellchadro.com/audible. Can you tell us, Bay, like a book that you really thoroughly enjoy? It could be a business book, a personal book, but just something that you can recommend to the audience.
Sure. I love Audible. I listen to audiobooks far more than I read because I can get through more when I'm traveling. But one of my favorite things for people that want to be a founder is get Ben Horowitz's book, which is The Hard Things About Hard Things. I listen to that on Audible. Amazing. And if you don't know much about sales or marketing, which if you don't, guess what? You don't have a choice, so you better learn it. There's a really, really great old book that still lasts today called Influence by Cialdini. So I'd say those two are my favorites.
Oh, that's awesome. No, great. How about a quote or a mantra that has basically either motivated or inspired you, or just something that you've kind of lived by?
Wow, so many. I'll flip it on you, and I'll say, first off, from the hustle side, I'm all about the work. So at the end of the day, I listen to a lot of motivational people, but just know one thing, that the world doesn't give a crap about you. So you moping around and you like,
that probably is the quote.
Yeah, well, right. That's the reality. But on the other side, to make it more positive. I mean, first off, it's just like, don't mope. Like, get up, get going, shrug it off. Literally, there's no one in the world sitting around feeling bad for what's going on in your life. That's it. But I also, for me, all the pressure I put on myself, like you said earlier, all the things I try to manage, I really like Brene Brown. It's a lot about, their emotional intelligence, the introspection that helps you balance these things. And she has a great quote that I repeat to myself every single night to make sure that, after all the stress and everything else, I don't let it get to me, is that no matter today, no matter what was done or what was left undone, I'm enough. And that I say that to myself every night, because I can't turn my brain off, more or less, sleep super well, but I just literally get so many things going in my head, and I have to remind myself that it's just another day, there's tomorrow, and like, no matter what, I have to be happy with myself, no matter what that checklist mentality, accomplishments, whatever's stacking up. So I say it to myself before I go to bed every night.
Really cool. That's very cool, Bay. How about an app that really helps you in business or your personal life with family, but just an app that you can recommend to the audience?
Just to keep things straight, I'm an Evernote addict.
Okay.
Whatever you need to get out of your head, most times it's not nearly as important or as ingenious as you think it is, but the fastest thing to do is to get it down. And then the last thing I'd say on that is right now trying out new platforms. So Ask a Whale by Justin Kahn's the new platform. I just did my AMA with them on Monday. It's a new way to communicate and connect and learn from some of the most influential people in the technology world. So I definitely say get on to Ask a Whale, and definitely feel free to add me at Beta Bay.
Very, very cool. Two more in this fast round. How about something that you've purchased that's the most impactful, but it actually cost under $100?
Ooh, my toys are not cheap.
This question kind of goes to those bootstrapping entrepreneur startups, people who need to be obviously extremely resourceful, to let them know that you don't need to spend a lot to get a lot. And so I think it's a fun question, but again, it kind of lets you know, the one guest, he rescued a dog, and the dog only cost $25, and yet the dog is worth millions to him. And so, the point of that is that he didn't need to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on the pet in order to get something, that had quite a bit of value.
I unfortunately, my wife would just laugh if she was listening. I don't have any probably toys or physical things like that I use that are under 100. I was looking around my house, and it's like, actually everything's more than 100. But I'll flip it to the conversation we've been having. If you don't have a passport, spend the $100 on the passport.
Okay, fair enough. That's good. And the last question in this round is a fun fact about you that maybe not a lot of people know about, but it'll certainly tell the audience a little bit more about you.
Oh, man, I just admitted to this the other day, too. As you get older, people may or may not know your background. I have been a musician my whole life, and I just found out, I can't believe I didn't know this, that one of my albums is actually in Spotify. It's been on iTunes for a long time. I'm a classically trained pianist, and I've been a producer and a DJ and the whole thing. And
So what's that album called, Bay?
I don't know if I want to tell you.
Come on, we gotta put a link to it. Come on, people are going to be downloading that thing.
Don't worry, I don't even know how to get the royalties off it anyways. But just look for my name, Bay McLaughlin, Spotify.
Okay, fair enough. In this wrap up round, it's sponsored by Snappa. So people that head on over to mitchellchadro.com/Snappa. This is for people who need graphic design without actually hiring a graphic designer. So, for example, for all of my blogs, all of my posts, for my website, I need to obviously resize all of my graphics for all the various different social media. For that, it's Snappa. We actually had Christopher Gimmer on our show 027, who's the founder of Snappa. Great company, great people behind the company. I certainly recommend it. My audience should head on over to mitchellchadro.com/Snappa and start your plan today. Sign up for our Listen Up email list. Get all the latest resources, advice, practical tips, and show notes at mitchellchadro.com/sign up. If you have been a regular listener of the Listen Up show, we want to thank you so much for all of your support, and please consider giving us a written review on iTunes by heading on over to mitchellchadro.com/iTunes. It really does help encourage, inspire, and it motivates others to start up and allows them to also find the resources and the advice that they need to get started. So again, that's mitchellchadro.com/iTunes. It literally will take 2 minutes for you to give a written review, and I really do appreciate it. Bay, in closing for this wrap-up, can you tell the audience 3 main takeaways that you can provide to us to wrap up?
First and foremost, it's all about your own personal responsibility. So lead yourself. Take accountability and responsibility for every day, every hour, and don't try to blame anything on anyone else. Again, the world just doesn't care. The second thing I would say, too, is that you have to be open to the patterns, and sometimes you may not have that perfect plan or that perfect job, so be open to the search in your life, because sometimes you just have to be floating to see that actual pattern.
And number 3,
I would say, is absolutely make sure that if you haven't found the thing you love to do, don't give up hope on that. Make sure to put yourself in a position, stay in motion, like I said earlier, and you will stir up the opportunities. But sitting in your home or your dorm room on the couch or the daily 9 to 5, it's very unlikely that the passion for life or whatever you want to be doing is going to randomly fall into your lap. You've got to get out there, put yourself out there, and start doing stuff.
And how can people stay in touch? I know that we've talked a little bit about it, but maybe right here in a pithy kind of way, all the quick ways that people out there in the audience are going to stay in contact with you and continue to follow you and reach out to you as well.
Well, if you want to talk one-on-one, fastest is on Twitter, Betabay, BETABAY. If you want to ask me a question and get a video response, it's on Whale. There's an application in iOS, Ask Whale, same thing, Betabay. And if you want to read, recommend, comment on the articles I write, either on Medium, also at Betabay, or you can search my name, just Bay McLaughlin, on Forbes as a contributor there. And then ultimately, I'm on Facebook. I'd love to talk to you guys there. But generally speaking, that's a place I post great interviews like this. I like to talk to people, so please reach out and actually message me. Don't just follow and like. That's great. But I actually like to find out what's going on in your life, too.
Bay, this is the first time that we're speaking, and I know that I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I am so thankful that you came on to the show. I really got a lot out of it. I know the audience will as well, and we're certainly going to keep in touch. We're so happy that you're part of the Listen Up Show family, and I just want to thank you again wholeheartedly for coming on and really talking to us about so many important things and also providing so much advice and wisdom and resources for the audience. We've gotten a lot out of it, and we want to thank you again.
It's my pleasure. I really had a good time. Thanks so much.
Hey, you take care, and we'll be in touch real soon, all right?
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye now. Be good. Listen up, trusted friends.